I floated up to the ceiling and saw a man dying down below, his face turning purple, a breathing tube trembling in his throat, doctors frantically performing CPR. I stared at him, and strangely, I didn't realize that man was me. At that moment, I was no longer someone named Andrew, no longer a 46-year-old body with 4 abdominal surgeries, an engineer stressed about deadlines or hospital bills. I was simply observing, simply existing. There was no pain, no sound, no distinct form. But one thing remained: awareness, consciousness. The knowing was still there. So if that body was dead, then what was this awareness that remained? People often ask me what I felt when I was close to death. They expect me to talk about the light, about heaven, about a voice echoing from beyond. But no. The first thing I felt was silence. A complete silence. Not of the hospital, not of death, but of a blank space. A space beyond time and definition, where only one question whispered through my mind. If you die and still know you exist, did you ever truly live while you were alive? To answer that question, I need to tell you about myself, about the name Andrew Collins, a man who lived long enough to think he understood what it meant to live, until everything inside him started to decay from within, and no one noticed. I was the kind of man people looked at and said was lucky. Lead engineer at an energy equipment firm in Seattle, a 6-figure salary, a 2-story house with a backyard, a beautiful wife, and well-behaved kids. But do you know what's more cruel than obvious misfortune? It's having everything and still feeling empty. It's sitting at the dinner table with your family while your mind drifts to work emails. It's holding your daughter as she falls asleep while secretly wishing she'd fall asleep faster so you could return to your laptop. I didn't realize I wasn't living my life. I was just existing, like a machine that could breathe. It all began in 2017. The mild stomach pains at first were easy to ignore. A busy man has no time for small aches. But what started as discomfort turned into cramping. I began losing weight, losing sleep, bouncing from doctor to doctor without a clear diagnosis. Over the next 4 years, I underwent 4 surgeries. First, an appendectomy, then a hernia repair, then mesh implantation, then another surgery because the mesh became infected. Every time I was wheeled into the OR, I joked with the doctors that I had become familiar with the scent of anesthesia, with the ceiling lights above the operating table, and with the disoriented nausea upon waking up. But strangely, each time I opened my eyes again, I felt further removed from life. I wasn't just losing health, I was losing connection to the things I once loved. My wife was worn out, my daughter became distant, and I no longer recognized the man staring back at me in the mirror. Then came the 5th surgery, spring of 2021. I remember it was drizzling that day. I sat outside the OR in my hospital gown, alone on a cold plastic chair. I looked down at my hands, thin and pale, hands that once drew intricate blueprints, now trembled like those of an old man. I no longer felt like myself. When the surgeon came out, he spoke gently, saying, "This one will be complicated, but we'll do our best." I smiled, but deep inside I knew this wasn't just another procedure. This was the edge. This was me letting go. And I did let go. I stopped breathing. And I saw something I never believed was real in all my 46 years. I saw a part of my soul leave my body. I saw myself no longer belonging to that flesh. And I saw what happens when a person is no longer living, but not yet fully dead. When the body shuts down, but the awareness wakes up. I thought that was the end. But it wasn't. It was only the door to a journey more astounding than the full abdominal surgery I had just endured. I never imagined that the other side of death could be a world so overwhelming that I wouldn't want to return. But what shocked me most wasn't the fact that I had died. It was what I saw clearly as my soul moved forward toward a place with no shape, no name, but carrying a truth so powerful that once you know it, you will never see life the same way again. I always thought the moment near death would be dramatic, like a scene from an action movie, with monitors beeping non-stop, doctors shouting, and frantic attempts to save a life. But it wasn't like that. My death came in a strange kind of silence. Soft like smoke, cold like the surgical sheets in the operating room, and so sudden that I didn't even have time to feel afraid. That morning, they wheeled me into the operating room at exactly 7:42 a.m. I remember the time clearly because I looked at the clock one last time, a small habit of mine to feel some control over the uncontrollable. The anesthesiologist said something about the IV. I smiled, closed my eyes, and expected to wake up in a few hours like I always had. But this time was different. I never woke up the same way again. At first, I thought I was dreaming. A blurry dream, without beginning or end, only a strange sense that my body was opening up. Not with scalpels and stitches, but from within, as if a hidden door in my awareness had quietly cracked open. I felt a force pulling me out of gravity, light as a final breath. And then I saw myself. Not through a mirror, but from above. I was looking down at my own body. Limbs limp, mouth slightly open, the ventilator pulsing in a weak rhythm. Doctors rushed, nurses tightened IV lines, and people were fighting to pull me back from death. But I wasn't there anymore. I don't know how long I had stopped breathing. In that place beyond, time meant nothing. 1 minute could have been a lifetime. 1 breath could have been an entire existence. The strangest part was, I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel panic. Only a sense that everything was exactly as it should be. As if I had just stepped out of a tight, worn-out suit I had been wearing for far too long. My body, the thing I used to call me, was now just a shell being patched together by machines. And the real me was floating freely above it, without shape, without gender, without any identity at all. I began to wonder if I was no longer that body. Yet I could still feel, still be aware, still ask questions. Then what exactly was this part of me that was floating free? Was it a soul? Was it consciousness? Or was it some other form of life that science has never been able to define? And if I didn't return, what would happen next? Would the people I loved still sense that I was near? Or would I be erased, like a corrupted file deleted from a biological hard drive? But then, in the middle of that weightless spiral of thoughts, I felt another movement approaching, a form of energy. It had no shape, no color, no sound, but I knew it was looking at me, and I knew that it knew me. In that moment, a voice that made no sound echoed directly inside my awareness. It said, "Andrew, you are not dead. You are being brought home." Home? I wanted to ask, but before I could even form the question, everything around me began to shift. The walls of the operating room vanished. The ceiling dissolved into nothingness. The hospital, the physical world itself, folded and burned like a sheet of paper in invisible hands. I was no longer floating above my body. I was being drawn into something deeper, wider, beyond anything I could name. It wasn't a place. It was a state of being. This was no longer near death. This was the crossing. This was the moment when there would be no turning back. And in the very place I thought would be the end, I encountered something beyond explanation. A presence without a face, without words. Yet it made me realize that the life I had always called reality was only the smallest piece of what was waiting beyond. Have you ever wondered what your soul might look like when all the layers are stripped away? There were no more operating room lights, no more sounds of the ventilator, no more footsteps of doctors rushing across tile floors. I was in a place without shape, without specific color, yet it was filled with something deeply real, intensely alive. It felt as if I were standing in the middle of an endless void, and that void was looking right back at me. I didn't feel like I was standing. There was no gravity. No up or down. I didn't feel like I was floating either. I simply existed within a space that defied all description. Not through sight, not through sound, but through the totality of my being. I had no body, but I was still me. I had no eyes to see, but I could see. No ears to hear, yet I sensed every vibration around me. It was a form of pure perception, unfiltered by physical senses. Everything seemed to flow straight into the center of awareness, and I realized that the center didn't reside in the head. It was a vast field of consciousness, and I was both a drop in that ocean and the ocean itself. The same question returned, this time clearer, echoing from within like a sacred reminder. If you no longer have a body, a name, a profession, then what are you? What remains when there is nothing left to cling to? When all identity dissolves? When every social mask is peeled away? When every relationship is undone, what is left that is still worthy of being called you? I felt like a stream of liquid light, dim yet alive. Around me there was no one, and yet I wasn't truly alone. There was a presence all around, as if every molecule of space understood me. It didn't judge, it didn't ask, it didn't push. It simply existed with me, as if whispering, "You are beginning to remember." I didn't understand what that meant until a current of images flooded into my awareness. Not personal memories, but something deeper, something I could only describe as soul memory. Fragments not from this lifetime, but from others. Moments when I was a child, somewhere in the desert, when I was a woman weaving by a fire, when I was a blind old man wandering beside a river, and even times when I had no human form at all, just a flicker of light among millions of other living sparks. I began to understand that I wasn't simply a man who died in Seattle in 2021. I was a consciousness that had moved through hundreds of forms of life. And this time, I hadn't been brought here to disappear. I had been brought here to remember who I truly was before I ever carried the name Andrew Collins. Just as I began to receive all of this, the space around me shifted. A gentle movement, like the universe breathing, like space itself stretching and contracting around me. Then, a kind of structure appeared. Not a physical shape exactly, but it had boundaries, a framework, like a doorway slowly opening in the middle of the unknown. From within, a light poured out, not blinding, not harsh, but so deeply familiar that it caught in my throat. It wasn't fear I felt, it was recognition. I knew I had entered this gateway before. Not in this lifetime, but my soul had passed through it. And this time, it wasn't just calling me, it was welcoming me home. As I moved toward it, a voice with no sound echoed through my entire awareness. It said, "To pass through, you must let go of the last thing you are still holding." I didn't understand. What was left to let go of? I had died. I had lost everything. But the voice returned, softer this time, yet deeper than before. You are still holding on to the idea of yourself. And in that instant, I understood. I was still clinging to being Andrew, to being an engineer, a father, a patient. Only by releasing even that identity could I truly cross into what lay beyond. And the moment I was ready to let go of the final piece of who I thought I was, the gate opened fully. But what I saw inside was not heaven, and it was not the afterlife. It was a city of the future, where I awoke in the body of a teenage boy I had never seen before. Have you ever imagined what might happen if your soul were given the chance to live again in a completely different body? I crossed through that gate not with my feet, but with the final act of letting go. And when I no longer held on to any sense of being me, everything changed. The dark space before me shattered like a mirror, each glowing shard floating outward and then coming together to form a vivid scene. Sunlight, birds singing, waves crashing against rocky shores. It was the sky over San Diego, but not the San Diego I had ever known. There were no gas-powered cars, no tangled power lines, no busy adults rushing down sidewalks. Instead, it was a city that felt calm, refined, and clean like an upgraded version of itself. And I suddenly realized I was standing in the courtyard of a high school, in the body of a brown-skinned teenage boy, maybe 17 years old. I didn't just see through his eyes. I felt everything through this new skin. My heart was racing. My long legs moved awkwardly, unfamiliar under my control. Youthful breath rose and fell in this unfamiliar chest. I wasn't observing him. I was him. I was living inside a body that wasn't mine, yet it felt completely right. His name was Elijah, and somehow I remembered that name as if I had lived his whole life. A day passed. I lived Elijah's life from sunrise to nightfall. He woke up in a small apartment with his mother. Breakfast was a homemade sandwich. On the table was a framed photo of his late father. He rode a bike through streets where silent self-driving vehicles glided like wind, past public squares where trees lit up in rhythm with footsteps. At school, he attended a class with a strange name, Consciousness Science. In that classroom, students didn't study for exams. They studied to discover themselves. An old teacher asked, Do you know who you are when your name is taken away? Elijah didn't answer, but I broke down inside him because that was the very question I had carried with me since the moment I left my body. At lunch, he sat alone outside. He opened a worn notebook and, in unsteady handwriting, wrote, "I know there's something inside me that doesn't belong to this place, like I've lived many lives before, and I can't pretend anymore." I was overwhelmed. A 17-year-old boy in the future carried the same soul awareness I had, a man who had just died in the present. So who was Elijah? Did I enter him? Or had my soul once been him? Or were we the same being, the same thread of consciousness moving through different bodies? I remembered the voice in that realm of light. The soul is not bound by time, age, or form. And now I understand. I hadn't entered Elijah. I had been granted the experience of another fragment of soul, so I could remember the deeper truth of who I was. The soul is not something fixed. It is a continuous flow. It may carry the name Andrew today, Elijah tomorrow, and something else on a distant planet another day. But deep within it lies a silent memory, a nameless longing to remember itself before it was ever anyone. By the end of that day, Elijah stood at the edge of a cliff, looking out over the ocean. The wind was strong. A beam of light fell from a pink and violet sky, and I heard the familiar voice again. "It is time to return." I didn't want to go, but I knew I couldn't stay. There was something I had to finish, even though I didn't yet know what it was. Elijah's body began to fade like mist. San Diego disappeared. The light closed, and I, a nameless soul once more, drifted back into the formless space. I thought I had gone too far to return to the body I left behind. But when I opened my eyes again, I was back in pain, in a bright white room, with the steady rhythm of a breathing machine in my ear. Only, I was no longer the same man. I was someone who had died and come back with new eyes. And the first thing I saw was my daughter's hand wrapped tightly around mine. Have you ever felt love like a wave strong enough to carry you back from death? When the light closed, I was no longer Elijah, and no longer the gentle stream of liquid light drifting through invisible space. I felt myself growing heavy, as if every cell in my body was being summoned back. There was a pull downward, sharp and heavy, like an anchor dragging me forcefully back to the world I had once left behind. And then I heard the sounds of machines, the steady beeping, the harsh hiss of a ventilator in my throat, the smell of antiseptic, plastic, the scent of artificial life. I opened my eyes. A white ceiling, dim lights. One arm was numb, the other was gripped by something warm and trembling. I turned my head slowly and saw my daughter's face. Her eyes were wide, as if she had seen a ghost or a god, or maybe both. When my eyes met hers, she burst into tears, silent and unstoppable, and whispered through sobs, "Dad." I couldn't speak. The tube in my throat made sure of that, but I didn't need to. Just looking into her eyes, I understood I was back. Not because of machines, not because of medicine, but because something far beyond science had called me home. I had been brought back not by the name Andrew, but by something more sacred than love. The doctor walked in. He couldn't hide the look of astonishment on his face. We weren't sure you'd come back after over 14 minutes of arrhythmia, but here you are." He didn't call it a miracle, but outside the language of medicine, he had no better word. In the days that followed, I lay in my ICU bed, my body exhausted, but my mind reborn. I no longer stared at the ceiling as a blank void. I saw the light streaming through the curtain's edge. I saw sunlight resting on my skin. I saw the nurse walk in with a food tray, tired from a long shift, and for the first time, I truly saw her. Not as a task, not as a routine, but as a person, a soul, alive. Everything became alive. The plastic cup is filled with water. My wife's swollen red hands were knitting by the bedside. The small mechanical sounds in the recovery room. Everything was breathing. Everything seemed to whisper, "Welcome back." A few days later, once I was able to speak again, I held my daughter's hand and asked, "How long were you sitting here with me?" She smiled, her voice shaking. "I don't know, but for a moment, I thought you might never open your eyes again." I looked into her eyes, And for the first time, I felt no gap between generations. I didn't see myself as the father and her as the daughter. I saw myself as a soul who had died, reunited with another soul I had loved through countless lifetimes. Not as roles, but as a remembrance. I was no longer Andrew, the lead engineer. I was no longer the patient, no longer the man hiding behind work to avoid the question of being truly present. I was someone who had come back from the other side of life. And I knew the most important thing wasn't how long I had been dead. It was what I had learned in the moment I became no one. A few weeks later, I resigned from my job. Not because I was weak, but I couldn't continue living in ways that no longer aligned with the person I had become. I began teaching children at a community center how to invent, how to code, how to think. But what I truly taught them wasn't in any textbook. I taught them how to notice life, how to pay attention, how to stop long enough to hear a leaf fall, to watch an ant cross the ground, to sense the breath in a friend's quiet sigh. Because I know now, if we are not living with awareness, we are wasting the most precious thing we have, the time we've been given before we leave this world again. But there's one last thing I must share, a message I brought back from the other side. It wasn't something I saw with my eyes. It was something etched directly into my soul. And if you hear it, truly hear it, you will never live the same way again. I died. I left my body. I lived in another dimension. And I came back, not to tell a strange story, but to remind you of something your soul once knew, but this life may have made you forget. That you are not just a body, that you are not your name, your job, or your social role, that you are life itself, temporarily appearing in a form that is slowly fading with time. And that truth, instead of making you afraid, should make you live more awake, more aware, every single day. Do you know what I realized first when I returned? That everything I once thought was important turned out to be dust covering what truly mattered. I used to believe my value was in being a lead engineer, in my six-figure salary, and in my ability to manage complex projects. But when I lay on that operating table, when I stopped breathing and slipped out of my body, no one called me an engineer. No one looked at my paycheck. No one mentioned my job title. Only two things remained: whom I had loved, and how consciously I had lived. None of us will escape death. But there is something worse than dying. It's living without knowing you're alive. It's chasing endlessly after something out there while your soul stands still, waiting for you to return. It's snapping thousands of pictures on a trip, but never actually being present. It's living as if you were immortal, then panicking when fragility shows up unannounced. I didn't come back to tell you to abandon everything, seek enlightenments, or live in solitude. I came back to say something simple. Live truthfully. Breathe as if every breath is a miracle. Look into your loved one's eyes as if there's nothing left to regret. Hold your child's hand as if it's the last time, because you never know when the last time will come. I used to think life was about accumulation. Now I know real living is about letting go. Letting go of ego. Letting go of anger, letting go of expectations, letting go of the image you carry so you can finally see the soul that's been whispering all along, "Are you truly here?" I had to die to learn that, but you don't have to. You can learn it now. All it takes is to stop. Take a deep breath, look around, and ask yourself one question. Am I truly living or just existing? You may not believe in heaven. You may not believe in reincarnation or energy or other dimensions, but if there's one thing I hope you do believe in, it's this. Your awareness, your soul, is waiting for you to return, and you don't have to die to find it. Live as if you have died before, because when you do, every day becomes a gift, every breath becomes a privilege, and every moment you are truly present becomes a miracle that needs no proof. Remember when I asked, if today were your last day, would you have regrets? Now let me ask again, but differently. If you had died like I did and were given life again, how would you live from this day forward? That answer is not for me. It's for you, and only you can write the next chapter with your life.